evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Allison Babin. I am the director of the Beverly Public Library, and tonight I'm thrilled to welcome you to our closing keynote event of Beverly Reads the Bear, featuring the author Andrew Krivak. So there are a number of people I want to thank for making tonight possible. First and foremost, our wonderful friends of the Beverly Public Library, who generously funded our entire Beverly Reads program, which in addition to tonight's keynote included 20 other related programs, over 90 copies of the book, and promotional materials. Also want to thank the trustees of the Beverly Public Library for their support of this project, and our amazing library staff who enthusiastically jumped into this whole project, especially our assistant director, Megan, our head of teen services, Katie, head of communications, Ona, and librarian extraordinaire, Joanne McElhaney, who curated this exhibit of art in the room. Thank you. We are also grateful to our many community partners and friends, including BevCam, who is here filming tonight, and our beloved Beverly bookstore, Copper Dog Books, for being here tonight to sell copies of Andrew's books. And I also want to thank all of you, because this wouldn't be possible without you. Thank you for making Beverly the awesome community that it is of thoughtful, engaged readers. On a personal note, it's a dream come true for us to be running this community read. It's long been a goal of mine to create a reading experience that would connect neighbors in Beverly. We have so many pressures and challenges facing us right now. Devices competing for our attention, budgets are stretched thin, wars overseas, turmoil in our country. And what a powerful experience it can be for Beverly residents to get some respite from all of these things by reading the same book at the same time. Over the past 6 weeks, I've seen this unfold. I've overheard conversations on the paths of Lynch Park, and I've been a part of conversations with banking executives at Rotary Club. It has made us contemplate the meaning of life, the power of nature, the experience of grief, and so much more. A bunch of people have asked me, how did you choose this book? And I have a number of very librarian-type answers. Our committee created a large list of candidates, and we read about 25 titles. We were looking for a book that could appeal to all genders, one with literary writing, but that was also accessible and not too intimidating, geared to adults, but would appeal to teens. On the more practical side of things, we wanted a book that wasn't too long, was available in paperback, and had a great cover. We wanted a book with ties to New England, something that our community could feel a connection to. We aimed to find a title with strong programming potential, one rich with themes that we could build all sorts of workshops and programs around. Beverly has a strong interest in sustainability. I know we have a lot of our sustainable people here in the audience tonight, so a book that could tap into that subject matter was appealing as well. And it had to be a book that would inspire conversations and opinions, encourage people to ask questions, and want to discuss it with fellow readers. We found all this and more in The Bear, and little did we know that we would end up with such a fun book that let us have giant cardboard cutouts that we could carry around the city. But on a serious note, and what these things don't capture, and what is actually the most important reason that we chose The Bear, is because of its pure magic, its uniqueness and power. We loved this book. I have both said myself and heard people say again and again, it's not like anything I've read before. Somehow, a book about the last two people on Earth is oddly not totally depressing. For me, it grounded me in nature, our interconnectivity with animals and plants, and the comforting fact that the natural world and life persist beyond our own time here. For the past 6 weeks, we've immersed ourselves in this world, conducting 21 programs inspired by the book, ranging from hiking to pickling, from foraging to printmaking. We explored art therapy as a way to process grief, and we were visited by live birds of prey. We have had almost 400 participants in these programs, and our copies of The Bear have been checked out 417 times. So tonight we have the honor of being joined by the brilliant person who laid the foundation for this special journey that we took together. I am honored to introduce you to Andrew Krivak, author of 5 novels, 2 chapbooks of poetry, and 2 works of nonfiction. His 2011 debut novel, The Sojourn, was a National Book Award finalist and winner of both the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for Fiction and the inaugural Chautauqua Prize. His novel, The Bear, received the Banff Mountain Book Prize for Fiction and is a National Endowment for the Arts Big Read title. He holds an MFA in poetry from Columbia University, an MA in philosophy from Fordham, and a PhD in literary modernism from Rutgers. Krivak lives with his wife and 3 children in Somerville, Massachusetts, and Jaffrey, New Hampshire. He is currently the visiting lecturer in creative writing at Harvard University and had a new book released just 3 months ago called Mule Boy. Please join me in giving Andrew a warm welcome. That wasn't good. Forgot about this.
So my next novel after Mule Boy is going to be a 1,000-page tome that takes place in 5 different cities, just to mess with you all. No, that's not true. Okay, thank you, everybody. Whenever a writer writes a book and people read it, all you can ever say is thank you. And what's most what I love to hear the most is that it does have such a community outreach that people will be talking about on a bike path or in cafes and in libraries and checking it out 417 times. Because a writer writes alone in a room with words, and often that's, for me, some of the best places to be, is alone in a room with words. But ultimately, too, those words have to get out. And Allison asked me to say a bit about my novel Mule Boy. And I did want to say that, not because I'm pushing my books, but because the fact is I write stories because my grandmother told me stories. And she told me stories about her growing up in the old country just before the First World War, and then what those villages were like around the First World War, and what the man, who the man she eventually married in America fought in that war. And it eventually made me realize that I'm the grandson of immigrants, and they struggled a great deal, and she seemed to want to take those experiences that were difficult for her, in a word, and turn them into something that helped her understand what life was about, and helped her understand too that the struggle was worth it. And that notion of the struggle goes all the way back to the Greeks. They call it the agon. It's there in Aeschylus, it's there in Sophocles, it's there in Homer, and it's here in American fiction. It's in Cormac McCarthy and Marilyn Robinson, and yes, it's in Krivak, because that's really what it's all about. And so I started with the Sojourn. That's a story about a grandfather, and Mule Boy is also a story about a grandfather's experience, but constantly taking that particular and moving it to the universal. And I do that because now at my age, I'm no longer a kid listening to a grandmother. Now I just want to know what the language is capable of. I know that there's fiction that's character driven. I know that there's speculative fiction that is world building. And all those things are fantastic. I love them. But for me, maybe because I'm a frustrated piano player, I just want to know what language can do. So I say that as a preface to Mule Boy, because what I wanted to do was to take all of those oral stories that I heard from this old Slovak lady and see if I could approximate oral storytelling on the page. So that's what I tried to do. Don't be afraid when someone tells you it's all one long sentence, because it's not one long sentence. It's not a sentence at all. There's not a single period in the book, but don't let that freak you out, because when people tell stories, they don't finish by saying period or next chapter. They take a breath for the next part, and they tell you what the idea is, how the story goes, what the struggle is, how the agon plays itself out, and all of that is an exhale of a breath. And so all you really need is, all I really needed was a comma to tell you when to inhale and when to exhale, and the rest you should just read. So don't, seriously, don't complain about that. You see how I talk to my kids. Stop complaining. Yes, and I was just trying to tell a story. That's it. So let me pivot to the bear, because that's why we're here tonight, and we're gonna have all night. I've been to a lot of libraries, and I also want to say that the libraries of this country have given the bear more life than I ever imagined when I sat down to write this book with only two things in mind. I'll tell you what those two things are in a second. But you know, I've been to Illinois. I was just in Cheyenne, Wyoming 2 weeks ago. I've been in Montana. I've been, of course, in New Hampshire. I think the entire state of New Hampshire read this novel, along with the entire town of Beverly. And I wish I could remember every single place, but the idea is that everybody who's reading it is doing it as a community, and to me that's just astounding. And so again, that is where my gratitude really rests. Because I did begin this novel on a little bit of a down note for myself. I had written 2 novels, and I just didn't think I wanted to write anymore, because I was too caught up in the world of publishing. I know I'm on camera, so I'm going to be careful about this. I did not have a good time, and I didn't think it was, I thought maybe I should just be a fishing guide. That would be a lot better for me. My second novel, I really understood that I wanted to write about Pennsylvania, where I grew up, and I started to begin to write about nature more. And so I thought, what I really would like to do is write a novel in which nature is the protagonist. Again, more Greek for you all. That just means the first actor. And so I thought, there's this idea of eco-fiction was beginning to emerge. And I don't write eco-fiction, but this idea of nature as a place that's still passive, and then we as humans move across this stage, the stage is passive, and we're wringing our hands about what's happening to it. And I just thought, what if I actually made nature the protagonist, the first actor? And so that's when I had this idea that a man, and eventually his daughter, would be part of that story. I didn't quite know what the story was yet, but the other thing I was thinking about from our new home at the time in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, which I was attracted to because it became a kind of mirror of how I grew up in Pennsylvania, in the mountains of the Poconos, in the northeast in Pennsylvania, at a time in the 70s when it just wasn't easy for a boy to want to be a writer. I listened to my grandmother, but when I went outside and started reading books and writing and stuff, often I had to fight with my fists to hang on to those books from people who just would rather you not be creative, or rather not be smart and want to read. I just love the language. So there was a kind of, and I'll use this word advisedly, a bit of anxiety growing up about what's going to happen to me? What am I going to do? And so years later, 50 years later, finding this place in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, it was the same sights, the same sounds, the same smells. Like, you ever swim in fresh water and you get a little bit of water up your nose? You feel it, but you can smell it too, that smell of fresh water. I love that. That's what it was like being a boy in those better moments in northeastern Pennsylvania. One day I realized that I was in a place that I loved, that was exactly like the place I grew up that I wanted to love and could not love. And so I thought, I'm doing exactly what it is I'm supposed to be doing in this place. So that's what this idea of nature as a protagonist came out of. The second thing I was thinking a lot about was the Laurentide ice sheet. Now, a little bit of context. 100 million years ago, the Laurentide ice sheet was stretched from what is now the Arctic down to about the middle of Pennsylvania, let's call it, over to about the Great Lakes. Enough ice for roughly 100 million years for the sea to drop 350 feet. And it's only been about 12,000 years ago that ice sheet retreated. And it retreated for thousands of years, generations of indigenous people following it, following in the shadow of a glacier that is, think of this, 2 miles high, not 200 feet, not 2 stories of a building, but 10,000 feet high. Generations of indigenous Americans just living their lives as this ice sheet retreated from northern Pennsylvania back to the Arctic. The Arctic is only 10,000 years old. Read Barry Lopez, his book Arctic Dreams for this. And so one day I was out fishing on Thorndike Pond, and I had been struggling with this story about the man and the girl living close to nature, but I just didn't know what the story was yet. I didn't know what the beginning, the middle, and the end was. I had no agon. There was no struggle. And so I was just casting a line, and it was misty, and no one was around, and I thought, boy, this place must have really been beautiful for those first peoples following that ice sheet back. And I'm on the western side, no, the eastern side of Monadnock, so the ponds are much shallower, and the mountain slopes a lot. The ice sheet took a lot of that ground. So when the ice sheet hit Monadnock, Dublin Lake is about 110 feet deep. It just gouged down and went up and around. And so I thought, this must have been really beautiful for those first peoples. And then I thought, I wonder what it's going to be for the last 2. And I thought, that's it. They're the last 2. And I rowed my boat back. I broke down my rod and rowed back to my writing table. And I started. The last 2 were a girl and her father who lived along the old eastern range on the side of a mountain they called the mountain that stands alone. The man had come there with a woman when they were young and built a house out of timber, stones pulled from the ground and mortar they made with a mix of mud and sand. It was set halfway up the mountain slope and looked out onto a lake ringed with birch trees and blueberry bushes that ripened in summer with great bunches of fruit the girl and her father would pick as the 2 floated along the shore in a canoe. From a small window in front of the house, the glass, a gift the woman's parents had given to her father after having received it themselves from the generation before, so precious a thing had it become as the skill for making it was lost and forgotten. The girl could see eagles catching fish in the shallows of an island that rose from the middle of the lake, and hear the cries of loons in the morning while her breakfast cooked over a hearth fire. This is the Laurentide ice sheet to give you a better sense of it. And here's Monadnock, Mount Monadnock. This is the place where I thought, or I knew my father and his daughter would live. And so for me, this work of writing authentically was going to be a kind of origin story for me, as well as a kind of return, the last become the first again. You see that. In this idea of the particular, moving from the particular to the universal too, I realized that I was living in the place that I wanted to create authentically in the natural world. So then I just really started to look and just see what was around me. And again, I was not interested in writing science fiction. I was not interested in writing some smoking dystopic landscape where young children run around and do crazy things. I write literary fiction. And I wanted to write in the tradition of the people in the place there who loved that land as well. Willa Cather is buried a mile from my house. And Henry David Thoreau, if you've climbed Monadnock, this is Beverly. You must have been in New Hampshire somewhere, right? They don't know they don't even know how to spell Monadnock in Cheyenne. But Thoreau used to climb Monadnock and sleep on the mountain in lean-tos and built with pine and hemlock branches. And you could read his journals. He complains about the rain a lot. And also then as a writer, I really admire the work of Cormac McCarthy and John Steinbeck, not because of what they write about, but how they see nature. They are really exteriorly writing. They rarely do their characters have a thought in their head. And I thought, if the last 2 are living so close to the land, they're going to be living in such a present moment that they have no time for interiority. They wake up, they gather firewood, they eat, they have time for a story because the father wants his daughter to know about these things that have been passed down to him, and then they go to sleep and they do it all over again. So this is the place that brought me full circle. This is I put this in here. It's a painting of from Abbot Henderson Thayer, who was a pretty depressed 19th century watercolorist who lived in Dublin, New Hampshire, which is the town next to Thorndike. And he painted scenes of Monadnock in about as many different perspectives as Monet would paint his cathedral in Paris. This is Monadnock in snow. And again, I apologize if those of you know this all. That's from my front window. And this is the pond. This is Thorndike Pond. It's a good 5-mile lake-sized pond. And that's an actual photograph that I took when I was out cross-country skiing one day. I was skate skiing on the pond, and I thought, this would be a good shot. That's the point there, and it goes back around. And again, this is just catalyst for my creativity. So I also too have to anyway, yeah. So if nature's going to actually be the protagonist in my novel, then the stage was going to be here in the Monadnock region, no place else, because it was all I knew. But I think that all of you are going to agree with what I'm about to tell you. But I have to say it when I go out west is. These are no Tetons. These are not Rockies. These aren't, the snowy range in Wyoming. Monadnock is not even 4,000 feet high. It's got a tree line because in the 19th century, the sheep farmers burned the mountains to kill the wolves, and all that soil eroded off that stone. That's why at 3,400 feet, there's rock up there. But still, if you're quiet and you listen, there's things that are so beautiful. They just really make me gasp. There's not a day passes when I don't see something dramatic. And again, I'm going to go back to that Greek word of the agon. An eagle. I'm swimming. Actually, my sister-in-law Veronica is here tonight in the back. I was swimming across the pond one day and stopped. She and my sister, my wife, her sister, my wife, were in canoes and were in kayaks, and I look across the point and I see this bird getting ready to go for a dive, and I say, look at that! And this eagle drops into a cove of Whittemore Island and grabs a bass in its claws, takes off and flies right over us up to its nest on Monadnock. That stuff is amazing. I've been sitting reading in the sun, as I'm wont, and a hawk will fly over me so close to the sun that it blots out the sun for a full second. That's cool. And then at night, sometimes I can't sleep, and if the doors are open and it's summertime, I've noticed that from midnight to exactly the dot of 4, up to midnight, all the nocturnal hunters are out there and they're doing their thing, and it's yet another drama emerging. But at midnight, silence. This nocturnal silence for about 3-4 hours and at 4 o'clock, boom, the passerines begin and the birds start to sing, and it just starts all over again. But that silence, complete silence, is as dramatic as anything. This is what the Eastern Range is all about. And this is the kind of drama that I was trying to capture. Does anybody know what the most forested state in the Union is? Anybody? Raise hands.
Massachusetts.
No. Sorry, I wasn't. Yes.
Is it Maine?
Yeah, it is. 83% forested. It's Maine. And in other words, it's green. 83% of it is green. No, it's Maine. It's Maine for sure. And number 2, at a close 81%, is New Hampshire.
Really?
Yeah, really. I would not lie to you. That's from the top of Monadnock, and this is Thorndike Pond. The figure 8 is Thorndike Pond. And as they say in the joke, you can see my house from here. And so that's the stage. That's the stage I set and continued. In winter, the snow began not long after the autumn equinox and still visited the mountain months after the spring. Storms lasted for days and weeks at a time, drifts climbing up against the house and burying paths as deep as some trees grew high. Often the man had to wade for firewood or trudge out to his tool shed at the edge of the forest with a rope tied around his waist. But when the wind settled and skies cleared and the low sun shone again, the man would wrap the young girl warm and tight in a pack, walk out into the stillness of winter and float on snowshoes made of ash limbs and rawhide down to the frozen lake, where the two would spend the day fishing for trout and perch through the ice. Snow covered so much of the girl's world from mountaintop to lake that for almost half the year, all she could see when she looked out that window was a landscape at rest beneath a blanket of white. And yet, no matter how long winter lasted, spring followed, its arrival soft, somehow surprising, like the notes of birdsong upon waking, or the tap of water slipping in a droplet from a branch to the ground. As the snow melted, black rocks, gray lichen, and brown leaf cover emerged from the once uniform palette of the forest floor, and the thin, silvery outlines of trees began to brighten with leaves of green against the groupings of hemlock and pine. Those were the days when the girl left the house in the morning with her father and studied a new world that pushed up from the dirt of the forest and emerged from the water at the edge of the lake. Days in which she lay on the ground beneath a warm sun and wondered if world and time itself were like the hawk and eagle soaring above her in long arcs. She knew were only part of their flight, for they must have begun and returned to some place as of yet unseen by her, some place as of yet unknown. So once I knew that the characters were going to be nature and the last two, I had to tell the story so that I remained faithful to what would be authentic in the sense of first and last about these characters. So time is measured by its natural rhythms. And the work that they do is both a thing they love and a necessity. Everything they do is necessary for survival. And also they tell stories about the past in a way that's a balance between the known and the unknown. And I want you to hang on to that, this idea, this dialectic of the known and the unknown. And so you could say that the human characters in The Bear follow the arc of classic storytelling. There's a coming of age, there's a journey, there's a love story, and it's not exactly a war story, but there is this classic agon as well. But each of these forms helped me to problem solve, if you will, as I went along, so that you, the reader, might be forgiven if you thought that these two were not the last two, but wanted someone else to come along and have it all get figured out and be good for us humans, right? Because I did not begin with this novel thinking about the extinction of the human race. I didn't. But once I realized that it wasn't the extinction event, it was just the last two, they're just characters of a drama, then I had to stick with that, and I stuck with that. And so no one else comes along, my friends. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. But what you have, though, are the names of writers and novels and the fact of writing, the fact of reading, and the fact of stories. This is it. I'm convinced that in an actual situation where there are the last two, that stories will also be something that remain present in the known, not the unknown, of whatever humans keep or what's been left behind. So I get to put anything I want in my novels because that's what's cool about writing fiction. And I often put other writers in my novels. So this, Wendell Berry's is a hero of mine, and Hilda Doolittle, I love her poetry. But there's other allusions to various more classical texts in here. And the idea was that things are passed along, and it's not so much. And the man too takes as much of what he knows as what he doesn't know, and gives it to the girl. It's also a kind of romantic education, if you will. This novel. But similarly, I also settled into my desire to write about something that I love to write about because I feel guilty about the fact that I'm a writer and all of my family and generations prior actually worked with their hands. And that's just about work. And I did that too with respect to authenticity because in the present moment, think about what your life would be like if what you had to do was stay warm and eat, and that's it. Or you would die. And that sort of hit me really closely when I was thinking about these things. This is a Native American self bow, and you see the self bow figures prominently as if almost a figure, a sort of sub character in the novel. And that was because it was the only way aside from foraging, that they could get protein pretty much, and fish too. But you know, one of the other questions I get asked a great deal is, did you do all of these things? Everything except make a self bow. And I did make a self bow out of a single maple, which was good enough to carve. But if you look at the Boyer's Bible or Native American Bowcraft, they recommend that if you're going to make an actual self bow, you take an 8-inch tree, and I guess around here, Osage orange is a favorite, but I couldn't find one in New Hampshire. That's a joke. Oak, hickory, oak is great. And there was an 8-inch oak in our front yard that I thought, oh, I could timber that and split the staves, get 1/4-inch staves, 4 staves per tree. And I looked at it, it was such a beautiful tree. And I thought, for the first one, I will kill you and I will not make any bows out of it, they'll all break. And I just couldn't bear it myself. I could not bear to kill this tree. And it's now a 12-inch oak. It's one of the most beautiful. A big pine around it had to come down. Another one was struck by lightning. That had to come down. And the oak persists and is now the sort of central character of my front yard. So gratitude for that. But in any case, the bow, this idea of writing about work is just a problem-solving situation, because, again, the man and the girl have to eat. And they need to have a way to get it. And for me, writing about work is critical to both the motion of the novel and also for the characters themselves. The year the girl turned 10, her father gave her a present of a knife with a bone handle and a leather sheath he had made the year he and the woman first lived in the house. "There's more," he said to his daughter. They walked outside to the man's tool shed where he kept his axes and saws and instruments for working with wood. "I want to teach you how to make your own bow and arrows," he said. "The year we first climbed the mountain together when you were 5, I saw along the way the straightest hickory tree I've ever seen. When I got the chance, I went back and timbered it." He pointed at the roof of the shed where 4 long staves were laid across the rafters. "I got those out of the wood. They've cured long enough. I was just waiting for you to be ready." The man retrieved the staves and chose the one with the fewest flaws, and over the next several days he began to work the back of the bow with a draw knife down to a single growth ring. He marked the center of the bow for the handle and checked the limbs for bend. Then he cut nocks for the string and tillered the bow until each limb bent evenly. He smoothed the belly and sides with his knife, burnished the wood with a round stone, and oiled the entire surface with deer fat. He worked slowly but steadily, and each step of the way the man taught the girl how to proceed, letting her have an equal hand in the fashioning of the bow. 2 weeks later, they strung it with sinew from the backstrap of a deer. The man smiled when he watched the girl draw the bow for the first time, and she drew it well. The next day they went into the woods in search of birch and dogwood for arrows, which they cut and trimmed and fletched with turkey feathers the men had found on the mountain path. Then he showed her how to knap arrowheads made from the bones and antlers of the same deer from which he had taken the sinew, and these he tied to the arrow shafts. Every day the girl practiced, shooting her arrows into a target of woven hemlock boughs she leaned against a rise. When the man thought she was ready, the two went into the forest, and he taught her how to read the landscape, looking for the signs, broken limbs, overturned leaves, traces of blood and scat that would tell them what animals had been there days or minutes before, if a rabbit had been in search of shelter, if a fox had been in search of food, if each had found what it was looking for. Their stories written over and over again. For animals are creatures of habit, he told her. And in the snows of winter or over the dirt ground of summer, there was always a tale playing out, and it was the hunter in the end, if she was a good one, who would write the epilogue. She brought home squirrel, rabbit, and turkey. The two of them ate well. The man also gave her a spool of thin line, one end of which she attached to the bow and the other end to an arrow, and the girl taught herself how to shoot fish caught in the weir. Often she missed, but when she hit one and it didn't wriggle off the tip, she came back with trout for dinner. This idea of survival, I think, is sort of comes and goes in the novel. You can't miss it, but I purposely tried to have you miss it in many ways in which the story moves along quite discursively. This is the love story aspect of it. I wanted that prose to make you forget that their days were quite literally numbered, insofar as this is what they had to do, and the only thing they had to do in order to survive. It's survival. that gets us to the center of the novel. And that is the trip to the beach. Sorry. Which of course is Maine. And the trip is through the back edge of New Hampshire, through the White Mountains and to the coast of Maine. For salt, you need to have salt. You can actually get salt by digging up hickory roots and using that. You get through. But the idea was, the allusion was that this is where the man and his wife went as well to get salt. And this is where the girl was conceived. That is a whole other part of the story at the beach while the man is dying. But in any case, time and the need to survive is what sends them on this journey to the coast. And it leads to the death of the man and the entrance of the bear. But let me say here, you're wondering why you don't know what happened to the others. But the man and the girl don't know either. This is part of the unknown in the novel. But it's not, I want to say don't worry about it. Because it's not their story. It's part of the known and the unknown, but it remains in the past, a past that they no longer have access to, except in what little they remember or stumble upon. And that stretching of time in a short novel is, well, I did it so that you would forget. It's almost as I thought about the fact that the shorter the novel is going to be, the more compressed your attention was, so that this distant past, which could be anything, but you know it's a lot longer than generations would remember. In the same way that the Native Americans, following this massive ice sheet, would be passing along stories of generations for thousands of years. They're not going to see that thing move. And yet, it does. This is part of the, again, this dialectic of the known and the unknown. But everybody, you can imagine, for the last 4 years as I've been on the road for this book, everyone wants to know what happened. But what happened is humanity's story came to a close. And that's all I have to say about the story, because seriously, it's just story. More importantly, I think regardless of what happened, is I want you to see that it's their story, our story, from first to last, that is and always will be a story of loss. We humans are the inheritors of loss. The last thing that the person you love who passes away will leave with you is an abiding feeling of loss. That's a guarantee. But all of us die. The man dies, the girl will die. It's what we do, first to last, and there's no secret or wondering about that. We cannot not leave the stage. And so loss is the story that nobody lives to tell, and yet memory and storytelling are all we have in defiance of that loss. If there's anything I hope you take away from this novel, it's that. So this is why I struggled a great deal with this scene, but I will read it nevertheless. Her father lay on the blankets, shivering and staring up at the ceiling of the cave all day. Every once in a while, she sat him up and straightened the bedding as best she could and laid him back down again. She offered him water, and he tried to drink but could not, and she pulled the gourd away, dabbed his face with her shirt, and watched him drifting in and out of what sleep he could find. It was coming on dusk when she realized neither one of them had had any food since the night before, and that she was hungry. Wrapped in salt in her pack was a second fish she'd caught, and so she placed seaweed over coals at the edge of the fire, and the fish over the seaweed, steaming it and turning it until the meat fell off the bones in great chunks, and she pulled it out of the fire. She asked the man if he was hungry, and he gave a small nod. He sat up and took some fish from the girl and put it in his mouth, tried to swallow and again could not. He opened his mouth and leaned over, and fish and spit drooled out and onto the sand. He lay back down on the blanket, his eyes wet and wide with crying, and what he could not say, but what she knew, was fear. By evening, every limb of his body was stiff and spasming, his eyes fixed on the cave wall, his face set in a bizarre rictus that in the firelight belied the pain he was in. The only sound he made was when his body tensed and began to lift off the blanket in a twisted arc, and from behind his teeth, something that sounded at once like a groan and a shriek passed between those teeth. If she touched him, he flinched. So she sat and talked softly to him, waiting when the spasms came and starting again when they passed. She reminded him of the gifts he had given her each year on the eve of the solstice, things he had taught her to make, and things she had made with him. She told him his stories would remain with her for as long as she had memory, and that if he died, she would take him home to the mountain that stands alone and place him in the grave next to her mother, next to the stone that looked like a bear, and she would live there for as long as the seasons allowed. She said she hoped that would be a long time, for there was one more story yet to tell, the ending of which neither he nor she would ever know. She woke up with a start in the middle of the night. The fire had died, but there was still a moon in the sky, and she could tell he was awake. She put her face over his face and felt his shallow breath and took his good hand in hers. His lips moved slowly over his still-locked teeth, but she couldn't make out what it was he was saying. Again, again, she said, and moved her face so close that his lips brushed her ear. I'll miss you, he whispered. She understood now and held his hand tighter. I'll miss you too, she said. I'll talk to you. Will you be there to listen if I need you? Yes, he said. She fell asleep again with her head close to his, listening to the last of those breaths. And when she woke in the morning, the sun rising in bright white on the horizon, he was dead. She touched his face, strangely softened now after what had taken him, had left him, pulled his eyelids down with her fingers, and drew the blanket over his head. Sleep well, she said. So, with the man's death, though, I wanted something else to be born. And that's why that's the last word of the novel. But, we'll go to that later. I wanted some possibility that the final chapter of humanity within the ongoing story of nature would contain a revelation. So, enter the bear. That's the black bear in Thorndyke Pond. I do swim in this pond. I do open water swimming. And I do not want to meet him. Because they have really bad eyesight, and I don't. So it would go poorly for me. But what I wanted to have happen was a kind of veil lift between the last humans and nature. Because what we willfully seem to disregard in nature as a fantasy, I wonder, what if it's revealed as a truth of the way things have always been? So the girl's first and final act of grief puts her on the plane of all of nature. So rather than thinking of us as in this hierarchy, it's really just a plane of existence. In our story, it's beginning, middle, and then eventual arcing to an end. It's just moving along this plane that everything else in nature understands as a horizontal rather than a vertical. In that case, nature was, is, and always will be the first actor, to go back to that. So, but this is why the girl can speak to the bear can speak to the girl. I'd like to think of it more as they communicate, and she understands. Is it her imagination? Is it her father's voice? Is it the animal actually talking? The answer, again, those really aren't the questions. The answer is, she sees at this moment, she hears, she acts, and she comes to understand now who she is, where she is, and I think most importantly, why she is. This is also something I want to say briefly, was my answer to the kind of crushing loneliness a lot of people thought that the girl would experience in this moment. I even had a reader ask me in the early days of this novel when it was COVID, and I was zooming into a high school in California, why would she not take her life out of despair? And I thought, wow. But I think it's in my novel, it's because she understands that she's not alone. Precisely because she understands this horizontal connection to nature. And now it becomes a verbal one too. So that's when I had a great deal of fun, I should say, writing this. The evening was colder than the one before, and the girl built up the fire with the abundance of deadfall that lay all around, and with the river a short distance from the stand of beach in which they sat, Its rushing current sounded to her like a chorus of more voices than she'd ever heard, and she asked the bear again how it was he could speak. The bear shifted and sighed and was quiet for a time. When he spoke finally, he said that long ago all the animals knew how to make the sounds the girl and her father used between them, but it was the others like her who stopped listening, and so the skill was lost. As for the bear, he learned it from his mother, who learned it from her mother. Not all animals had the range of voice that could be heard, he said, but all living things spoke, and perhaps the real question was how she could understand him. The girl sipped at her tin cup of pine needle tea and considered the question and said she found it hard to believe that all living things needed to speak. Believe it, said the bear. Whether you hear them or not, they need it like they need air to breathe. The girl had found a place to sit by the fire in an old and gnarled system of tree roots that grew out of the ground like a wizened hand. She looked down at them in the firelight and followed them with her own hands as she fell deeper into thought, studying the way the beech roots formed a series of knuckles and fingers that branched from the thick silvery trunk and disappeared into the ground. What about trees, she asked. Trees too, said the bear, and glanced up in the dark at the tops of those same beech limbs. The trees are the great and true keepers of the forest, he said, and have been since the beginning. Some animals of old said it was the trees themselves that taught them to speak, for they never make an unnecessary sound. Each word, like a breath, carries with it some good, some purpose, and for this reason, trees are the wisest and most compassionate creatures in the woods. They will do all in their power to take care of everyone and everything beneath them when they have the power to do it. The girl's doubt had turned to wonder now, and she leaned forward in the firelight and asked the bear, "What do they sound like when they speak? It's not like the sound of rustling leaves, is it?" The bear, too, now thought for a moment and said, "Go down to the river bank. There's a stone there around which the floods have passed for so long that a deep eddy has been dug on the downstream side. That's where I've been catching my fish. Go and listen." The girl stood and walked away from bear and beech along the bank to the water's edge, where she found the stone in the hole and bent her ear toward the water that eddied slowly around the stone. She heard the sound of a gurgle and a hiss all at once, slower than the rest of the river rushing by, for the water seemed pulled back by the depth of the cut. She put her hand into the current as though to touch the sound and pulled it out, walked back to the bear and sat down. The bear knew both what she had heard and not heard, and while she sat in silence now, he told her that the voices of the trees were the voice of the forest, and that when they spoke with such indifference to time that it would take the girl several moons to hear one of their conversations, the better part of one just to hear a single word, but to them it was no different from any story told to any other around a fire in the night, a word spoken in a moment or a lifetime. Did you never feel as though the trees around you on your mountain were somehow companions to you and your father? Asked the bear. Yes, said the girl, and thought back to when she was younger and would sit alone in the forest on a blanket of moss and listen to the wind. There were times when she believed she heard a voice that was not the wind, a voice as old and slow and gentle as water curling around stone. Those are the trees, replied the bear, companions to us all who forget nothing that happens in the forest beneath them and whose memories span seasons beyond count. For each one carries the memory inside of every living thing that has ever touched it or passed beneath the shade of its limbs and leaves, trunk and branches. Every living thing that has ever walked the earth. The bear looked into the fire then and said, "The wood you burn to cook your food and keep you warm, the smoke that rises was once a memory. The ashes, all that's left of the story it belonged to. Why else would you be carrying the ashes of your father?" The two were quiet then for a long time until the girl put her hand on the pack she always had next to her and said, "So they will remember us, won't they?" "For as long as they stand in the forest," the bear said. "Of that I am certain." So from here, the girl needs to get home. This is now her struggle. And it's through the White Mountains. And I'm sure many of you have been all around the world to different mountains. I've been to Rockies, Sangre de Cristos, the Tatras, the Dolomites, and I love the mountains. But the White Mountains for me are a kind of, I don't know, it's a brutal and a benign landscape. I fish there, ski there, hike there, and I just love the White Mountains. And so I put the girl in that benign and brutal landscape precisely as a way to bring about this struggle. The bear, for his part, he's got a role to play and he sleeps. So, but this is the moment where the girl's own struggle is her awakening of who she is and where she is and what will become of her now as a young woman, not just the girl, for as much time as she's got left. And so geographically, this is exactly the route she and her father would take, but with the death of the father, it comes at a time in the fall where she just can't make it through the winter, and the bear knows this. So there was a practical as well as a creative necessity here, and I wanted this to be an example of that contrast. The puma, of course, which mountain lions or pumas or whatever or catamounts and cougars have a kind of mythic status in New Hampshire. They're there, but no one's ever seen them, and they go back a long way, sort of like the Nittany Lion in Pennsylvania. So the puma becomes my philosopher queen in this novel, who speaks the benign and the brutal truth to the girl just when she needs to hear it. The puma did not go inside this time, but paced at the entrance of the cave, stopping to look up at the mountain every now and then as though wary or waiting, then stood still in the half-light and told the girl there was one more winter to come, that although she knew the way home from here, was not the time to make her way home if she wished to return to the mountain that stands alone to bury her father. The cat had given her enough food for some weeks and fur she could use to keep warm while hunting if she used what skills she had to cure the hides. The rest was all around in the forest that did not die in winter, but only changed. Look at the bear, the puma said to the girl. On and on he sleeps, but in his dreams he wanders as he did awake, going back over the paths of forest he once knew, paths he walked with you, telling you much about the things others like you never knew or cared to know. You are bound to him now, as closely as you are to the bones you carry. If you don't wake, this cave will be your tomb, and the bear will carry with him when he wanders a memory of an autumn when he traveled for a time with one who carried grief. But if you do wake and journey home, the bear and a line of bears after him will carry the story of the last one's return to the mountain that stands alone. Carry it for the forest to remember, for as long as there's forest beneath the sun. The girl did not look up when the puma finished speaking. Her eyes remained fixed on the fire. The sky had become overcast, and the smoke of the fire no longer drew straight, but wandered in waves between the pit and the ground, a harbinger of more snow to come. She reached up and eased the straps of the pack from her shoulders, stood and walked with it to the back wall, where she left it on the floor next to the sleeping bear. So, this is how the girl learns and lives. The bear wakes up and the two are one for a moment, just for that season, until their separate paths go off again into this singular world. And she does return home and buries her father. Oh, there you go. We thought that slide was gone, but this is a view of the path up Monadnock. My brother-in-law Tom knows it well because he's run that in a race. Painful. But this is one of the cairns of Monadnock. And this constantly was giving me the anchor, if you will, the focus of where and why and how the girl would return. She is a woman now. The circle is complete for her own journey in the space of this novel. The idea of time expanding and compressing is, I see as a writer as a kind of a heartbeat in it of itself. So there's life within the life, and I was aiming for that. She buries her father next to her mother, each of them alone and together on the mountain, and she holds all that's left of us in the world, right to the last. She who is the soul that knows and embraces this reality of loss. The sun was arcing into the west when she had finished hammering and digging a hole in that earth. She knelt down, opened her pack, and took out the skin, untied it, and looked once more on the bones and ashes of her father. Then she rolled the skin up again, placed it into the grave, and pushed the dirt back into the hole with her hands until all she'd held to the man was covered and gone. Now come the days when I'll miss you. She stood and stepped back and looked at the scree that formed a small mound on the ground and felt all of a sudden what the man had told her he had felt when he buried the woman. Though rain and snow would be the only things to touch him in that ground, still she wanted nothing to disturb him. So she set out collecting stones of the same size, and with the hours that made up that longest day, she erected 4 walls around the perimeter of the grave, the coarse and wide, 6 long and 6 high, set without perpend of any kind. Then she began to fill the inside one by one with whatever rocks and small boulders she could lift and carry, until the area within was filled except for a small hollow in the middle. And to this she placed the compass and covered it with a flat slab of gneiss, the striations of which reminded her of the waves in the sea. It was a long time before darkness fell and stars began to wheel across the sky. And though a night wind whipped against her face and body on the mountain, there was a warmth to it she had not felt since she last stood there on the longest day of the year and let her clothes and sweat dry. She was hungry and she was tired, but she did not want to leave them. The wind blew north to south across the summit, and she crouched down between the cover of both graves and laid on that stone, and in that silence alone, a girl no longer, though forever their child. Today, it's been 8 years since I finished The Bear, and 6 since it was published in 2020. I've heard it read from the distance of a fable. I've heard it been called science fiction and young adult literature and all that stuff, and eco-fiction. And somehow, too, a meditation on despair and hope, even though, you know, as you heard in the beginning in the introduction, it's hard to find. It's remarkable to find hope in a story like this. But I hear all this and I say yes. And at the end of the day, at the end of the night, The Bear is fiction, no more, no less. Let me go back, make the circle complete to my own beginning, is that I just wanted to tell a story because that's what got me hooked on what language is capable of. Listening to an old Slovak lady tell me stories about a time where she struggled. So I want to leave you with this, though, and it's a bit broader, moving from the particular to the universal. I don't think we should forget ever that we are, always have been, and always will be players who step on this ever-changing stage. We play our part, we take our leave. And one day that stage is going to change into a place that no longer needs us to play our part in it. It might be something that we do. It might be something we have no control over whatsoever. But regardless of the progress of faith and philosophy that we maintain, or the literature and the art, or all of the things that we turn to for our immortality, personal immortality, we all have to come every day we'll all come, like every great narrative, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, to the end. It's just the fact. What I'm certain about is that what is beautiful and powerful and mysterious about this stage is that stories will remain beautiful and powerful and mysterious. I think that nature actually contains stories as much as we do, and perhaps we might even have learned it from that. Storytelling is one of those mysteries that is no less beautiful, no less powerful, and no less mysterious, because it's bigger than we are. It just is. It's so big that's why I think nature tells stories, and will tell the story of those who are the last and who once walked through a land where so many of these people made their home. So I hope this would continue to shape and defy your imaginations as we pass through our incomprehensible world every day, generation after generation. Not to take away anything from where we do find these notions of our immortality and faith or philosophy or art or anything like that. But I want to finish with a line from the writer Michael Ondaatje in his last novel, Warlight, which was a story about post-war London, just the 6 months after the war, which changed everyone's lives. He says, "Your own story is just one, and perhaps not the important one. The self is not the principal thing." Maybe that's the kind of restructure of our imagination that we need to think of. That it's not, there's no principle top to bottom, but it's this continuum of the horizontal existence. Maybe some of the more daily and tactile problems we have with the environment, with society and things like that, could come through thinking about storytelling from that perspective. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. Yes, sir.
I imagine you've heard every possible question. We could probably just say, tell us our answers.
I'm always surprised. Always.
You've spoken a lot about nature, of course, understandably. There's one powerful scene in the novel when the father gets injured that, in a way, is a little departure from the nature. And I wondered what you were up to there, and what is it a creature that bites him?
Yeah. So, and in fact, I would not disagree with you, but no. Think about it this way: is he dies? Yes, it's a mammal. Honestly, I thought of it as a raccoon, but it could be any mammal that has the bacillus of tetanus in its saliva. He dies of tetanus, and I searched a while for I couldn't do rabies because Zora Neale Hurston did that. Because I'm a modernist, right? But seriously though, it was just coming upon a bacillus that had persisted as long as humanity, and that would kill him. As soon as he does that, he realizes, and I did actually confer with an internist who says, if you want to have him die, make him try to rub it off, because then it gets in there. And the tetanus shot was introduced after the Civil War. One of the interesting things about America at our 250th anniversary was tetanus was on a rampage around the time post-revolution, when we really were celebrating with things like firecrackers on farms and stuff like that, because the tetanus bacilla lives in dirt, and people would get lockjaw, and they figured out something was going on. And so I would say that it's precisely very natural, and I did have this idea in my head of it sticking to the theme of nature. He dies quite naturally, quite horribly, but this is what hides as well in the shadows as well as in the brightness of the sun. You could die anyway, and this is how he dies. He's very careful about what he does and how he lives, but it's that moment of curiosity about the past, what he does not know, that sends him down there, and down into a place where an animal that is perfectly capable of carrying a bacteria that would kill him in the space of several weeks lives happily, as far as animals go. So does that make sense now? Or at least,
What I was also wondering about, though, is it seemed like the one human structure he's going back to, the bricks are...
And it's that, storytelling is all about curiosity. What if, So I wanted that human curiosity to be in him. He does well with what he knows, but he doesn't know everything. And that's what gets him. So.
Hi, so you mentioned that you fish, but I'm curious about what your research process was like for the other survival skills, the hunting, navigation, foraging.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was growing up in Pennsylvania, I worked with a gardener, and he taught me a lot about northeastern plants and stuff. And we were always eating. I ate a lot of stuff. My mother, it was my mother's grandmother, who's this old Slovak lady. She was always out in the woods, mushrooms. No mushrooms in this book, because I could never get mushrooms right, and that would be another way to die. And so that was a lot of fun. We eat what we eat, But also, but the survival, growing up in Pennsylvania too, I've been in some cold spots, and let me say this: if you think about it like A to E on a spectrum, right? E is the need for survival. I've probably been in C, very uncomfortably. And so it doesn't take much to extrapolate with a good imagination what it would be like to go from C to E. That and a few YouTube videos. And really it's about getting it right. Look, I'm not gonna, I honestly wanted to be as authentic as possible. And the other thing about problem solving as a novelist, if you're concerned with authenticity, is that if I can't get it right, I'm not gonna put it in the story. And you know, I hunt around, do a lot of research. On my first novel, The Sojourn, the research was in depth. I mean, I was in the bowels of the London Imperial War Museum with Paul Cornish, who's the firearms curator for the Mannlicher 95. That was cool. But with respect to the outdoor stuff, you know, the Boyer's Bible, I told you you know, I had not made a good self-bow, one that could actually, you could hunt with. I don't think I ever need to or want to. But, you know, so I think if that's your question, that's how I would answer it. I would get as close to E as I could. And if I could get authentically close with my imagination and still be correct, I'd do it. If I couldn't, I backed off. Yeah. Yes.
So I find very kind of like soothing that somewhat language endures. And so I was wondering if, I don't know, what's behind the choice in some sense that, you know, it is like, at the end of the day, what matters, the stories endure. And the fact that, you know, we as humans, someone will be gone, but language continues in some sense. That's a pretty strong sense. And yeah, and so I don't know. Generally I didn't feel like sad, or I just felt naturally, happy. But it's kind of like interesting sense of like balance.
Yeah.
In some sense. Yeah. I don't know if the visual makes sense.
I think I can give you some insight into that from my own brain. I was thinking about, even in situations like this, what would make me happy as a human. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if something's really beautiful, it makes me very happy. And so I tried to create a language that was harsh but beautiful. Thinking about, again, what was the language capable of? Was I capable of playing the notes of the language such that it had a kind of musicality to it? And I've learned that from other writers that I read. I read all the time. I read people I love. If I don't love it, I don't read it. And I'll just stop. But if I can learn something about that from a writer, I'll write it. And I'll tell you another thing about, let's go back to Pennsylvania for a minute. I just felt like there was an unfairness, a meanness in the world when I was growing up as a kid in Pennsylvania. And I can take care of myself. But I think, and I've been examining this because I get this question from kids, I should say kids, students, writing students, very young, who really want to do this. And they want to know, why do you write? And at one point, I just almost, out of just a quick response, said, I write out of spite. And I thought, no, that's not entirely the reason. I thought back to the fact that I would get, it was a kind of sadness that I was not allowed to be creative as a boy. And so I realized that over the years, I try to write like this as a way to push back against the meanness of the world. That's all I got. So.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Are you sure that there might not be just like a handful of people or maybe Pennsylvania, any chance?
Hey, a girl can dream, right? There's a question here. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Go ahead, ask.
Where in Pennsylvania did you live?
Where in Pennsylvania did I live? I grew up in the Wyoming Valley. I was born in Wilkes-Barre in the General Hospital, and I grew up in a town called Dallas, which is west, in the Banff Mountain, very rural at the time. The dirt road I lived on wasn't paved until I was in like a sixth grade in school.
I lived in Danville for 15 years.
Danville south, a bit south, yeah. Still like coal mines, a little out of the valley, but yeah. You'll love Mule Boy then, I guarantee you.
I just wondered about your thoughts on when she went back. She didn't go to live in the house, and I was curious if it was because that was her father's memory and not so much hers, but it was part of her memory, so I was curious about that.
Absolutely. So again, thinking about it, moving things from the particular to the universal, she's come to such a place in that year. The year is a lifetime in this novel. Again, this compression and expansion. What does she need books for? Why does she need to write? She has everything she's learned in her memory. She's not going to forget. And so the books are what brought her to where she is let me say this. The books were important to her last year, but where she is now, they're nothing more than a place that holds, mouse poop. And it's, raccoon kits play in it. And it eventually just disintegrates. The paper is the most disintegratable thing in that house. And everything else, the shakes on the side, everything else that he made, it's just gone. And I think that when I brought her to that porch, I realized it was a real moment for me. Even pre-burial, I knew I had to deal with that stuff of the house. And that's exactly how I dealt with it, exactly the way nature would deal with it. So that then, I'm going to anticipate the next question, so that when she dies, and she dies in the fall, I was outside in the spring up in Jaffrey, and I saw this maple shoot poking up through a leaf and the snow. And I thought, that's amazing. That's so powerful. And I thought, yeah, if she dies in the fall and no one's there to do anything, when the snow melts, it's conceivable that there could be some kind of shoot just coming up out of her body. Yeah. And again, nature. This is the drama. This is the actual story. And those things are quite authentic, right? So there you go.
So what age was she when she died?
I don't know. You tell me. Really old.
So how has it changed for you that you're able to write now where you're living, and that you weren't as a child, and that you didn't take refuge as a child in writing or doodling or some other form of personal creative expression? Why is it possible now when it wasn't then? Is it within you? Is it in the community that you're in?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question as well. Every writer is a craftsman if you're going to be a good one. You got to put in the hours. And so slowly along the way, I both consciously and probably mostly unconsciously did the things that I needed to do to become a writer. It doesn't mean that it's guaranteed I'd be a writer. There's folks out there who are better at school and putting two words together than I ever was. But something in my own formation was moving in that path. Whenever I was on a path to make a decision about something, and I could catch a glimpse of the writer there, I would move in that direction. I see that now if I look back over my time. And I always I looked for people who would be good mentors for me as writers. It astounds me that students don't want to be not criticized so much as they don't want to be told that something they wrote could be better. That's the only way you get better. I mean, I had some brutal teachers, and I thank every single one of them. Because they weren't being mean. They were putting me on a path to being beautiful. And so that's it. And so eventually you put, it really is, there's a kind of quantitative number of hours at the desk that turns into a qualitative capacity to write a story or a novel if you're awake to it. And so I've just been maybe tenaciously awake to all of this. And I don't know, I can't explain it. I feel super lucky. I have no idea why I wrote this and I'm up here and others, I just don't know. But, like all grace, it's a gift we don't deserve, and yet something gave it to us. So I'm trying to do something with it, with what I got left.
So,
I don't have a question, I just have 2 remarks.
Okay.
I want to thank you for 2 things. The first one, you mentioned that you wanted to explore how language can convey what you want to, like...
Yeah, storytelling.
Yeah, storytelling,
Yeah.
your ideas. And for me personally, your book conveyed a lot. So I felt like your language was simple, but very powerful. So simple, not in a simplistic way, but I would say like an air in the autumn morning, you know, like it's clear and nothing much in it, but it's very powerful and it gives you energy and I don't know, it makes you happy. So this novel made me happy, and actually you said this remarkable to find hope in this novel, but I found hope in this novel, and I don't want anyone to be there along with this girl, you know, somewhere. I'm yes. So you know, some people they think how they want to die. Some people they say I want to die in the battlefield. Some people they say I want to die among my loved ones. And for humanity, I want humanity to go in this way, and peace with nature.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
this way. I think it's perfect way for humanity to go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
A much simpler topic. Why a bear?
Yeah, that's good. You know, the bear is the most anthropomorphized mammal in all of history. In the Indo-European languages, I think the actual name for that species of mammal is Artco. But the myth or the superstition was that if you said the name of the animal, it would appear. And people, you know, you see it now in Romania and Japan. Bears are not fun. They're tough and they can hurt you. And so that's why bear just means the brown one. In Russian, medved is the honey gatherer. The Bruins, you know, that's just another way. The brown one is just a way of giving a name to something so that it would not appear. And so the bear is obviously part of the landscape. It becomes an authentic character of the landscape. There's talk of wolves. And, you know, Monadnock did have plenty of wolves around it in the 19th. I shouldn't say plenty. There were wolves, and they did eat the sheep of the wolf farmers, and they got them some hummed up about it too, so they killed them. But McCarthy did the wolf in The Crossing, the novel I worship, and so I couldn't do that. But what else has that kind of gravitas? I mean, that's not a rhetorical question.
Maybe take
One more question.
As you were writing this book,
Yes, okay.
Like as you were taking the journey of like coming up with the story and making the characters, were there any moments where like you discovered something, and like were there anything in the book that kind of you like as you discovered it they remained unknown, and you kind of and like that feeling of like what's unknown and also what is known, like did you feel any of that?
You mean is there discovery in the writing process? Is that what you mean?
Like, did you discover the world and like kind of as it unfolded it and like as you wrote it?
Yeah, I think as a writer, when you set out to write about a particular subject, you're probably not going to be a good one if you don't really discover more things about it than you set out with. And so, yeah, lots of things, natural things I was discovering along the way. More food that I could actually eat than when I was a 16-year-old working for Tom Kravitz. And also too, making snowshoes out of hemlock limbs is pretty good. You can float around on those puppies. Things like that. But then more specifically, you know, the thinking through the fact of what kind of wood would I use for a self bow really makes you think about what species of trees are quite literally in your front yard. And so that's important for me, and all of that is to say that as a writer, also too, like, you know, winter. various things about that. You know, I have not been on the verge of hypothermia, but I've been really damn cold. I'm wondering if this is going to be it, that kind of cold. Some of that was in New Mexico too, but we won't talk about that. And so those sort of things that take you all to these different places are always really cool, I find. And that's the only word I can use, cool as a writer, because that's where you start to find out the right word. One of the things I always talk to writing students about is, why do you want to use an adverb when you could just find a better verb? Or why use an adjective when there's so many amazing nouns out there that you could choose from? You wonder why this book is so short? because I search for the right word. And I'm being slightly facetious. I'm sure there's some adverbs in here, maybe 2. But more, let me speak to your point again, is that those things make me I zero in on it. Okay, what is the right tree and what's the name for it? And the names, you know, names have a mythical quality too. And the man and the girl have no names because they don't need names. That's another thing I learned. And then finally too, let me say that, I lost my train of thought here. I think your question is really an excellent one because it makes me stay honest and authentic as a writer. And it goes back to my initial, when I started this whole talk about telling you all that I'm really just interested in what's the language capable of. And that's what I learned, was this constant, that language has a capacity. It's not flat, it's not passive, it's none of these things. It's actually it's a lot more interesting than I'll ever be. And so I think that's what I learned. Yeah, cool. Okay. One final thing, and it really is the final thing. This is my last bear talk for the foreseeable future. I've been getting them scheduled pretty much straight for the last 4 years, and I got nothing. So thank you very much. I'm back in Massachusetts.